Hello everyone, welcome to the Honey Podcast YouTube channel where not everything is so sweet all the time. I'm your host Pamela Dragolov and I'm so excited to finally bring my vision for this podcast to life. This is something that I have been looking forward to creating and being able to share my self-care and healing journey with each and every one of you. I really hope that this channel can be a safe space for each and every one of you to find comfort. For this first episode, we're going to dive deep into the topic of grief. And a lot of you may be wondering, what does grief mean, or what does it even look like? And quite frankly, there is no parallel existence of grief. Whether that be you're experiencing the loss of a loved one, are currently going through a breakup, or have recently lost a friendship that was very important and meaningful to you, or it can even be grieving the loss of yourself. And I do want to mention that that's something that a lot of people really forget about a lot of the time. And grief can exist within yourself. You can miss the old version of you that used to exist before a situation occurred in your life, or before something that left a very heavy impact on who you are now and completely changed you. I really want to discuss that no matter how difficult and challenging your life may seem, you are strong enough to push forward and repurpose the way you live your life and find new appreciations for it. I want to demonstrate to each and every one of you how I've done it for my own personal journey and hopefully motivate and encourage each and every one of you to do so as well. In April of 2022, my life officially changed forever. I remember being so excited to go on this trip that my 3 best friends and I had planned and had been looking forward to for many months. And we had just completed our finals. I thought I was getting through the hard rush of the stress that I was feeling and the pressure. At that time, I thought academic success was everything. I was so fixated on receiving certain grades. Little did I know that everything was going to change after that point forward. Both my parents and my brother were away traveling and had not returned when I was already back home. And I would call them every day to check in. And no one called me that day, and I remember thinking to myself, this is very weird. Why haven't they called back? They normally call every single day. So I called my mom, no answer. Texted each of them, no answer. I remember my mom finally answering her phone. And I felt such a sigh of relief. I'm like, yes, they're answering. Everything's gonna be okay. And she calls me and says, we're in California. We're speed driving back to Vancouver because your brother is very, very sick and we're gonna go to the hospital. And obviously we didn't have medical care in the States, so it made most sense to come back home. I just remember my whole world flipping upside down within those 48 hours. Within those 48 hours, I found out that my 26-year-old brother, who was a lifeguard, had just received his Bachelor of Biology, had stage 4 cancer. And that was beyond what I was able to accept at the time. It just didn't make sense to me. And I remember at that time they had told him he only had a few days left to live. And it breaks my heart truly to know that that was something that someone had to live with for such a long period of time. My brother was such a fighter and didn't want to give up. He wanted to stay optimistic about the situation and do the chemo treatments, even though he wasn't strong enough to do it at the time because there was a tumor that was bleeding in his stomach that was causing him to do the constant projectile vomiting. He stayed in the hospital for a few months and did the treatments, but after a while, there was no room for him there. So we had to go in the old folks' home across the street. The hardest thing for me was that I needed to stay strong so that my parents didn't have to worry about me and they could provide that additional support that he so desperately needed. And it was something that was so difficult for me because I had to pretend that I wasn't so deeply affected by what was happening just so they can feel an extra sense of security to give him that additional support. And every time I went to go visit him, he still had the biggest smile on his face, despite everything that he was going through. I remember this one time so vividly because it was in that moment that I realized everything that was happening had become a reality, and it was no longer this idea of a nightmare that I had been thinking of. I went up to him by the hospital bed and was just reminding him of how much I loved him and how much I cared for him. And he said to me that this is going to be so hard for you and this is going to be a really hard thing that you have to overcome in your life. You just need to stay incredibly strong because I will be there watching over you, Mom and Dad. And hearing your sibling say those words to you are just, it's such an unimaginable thing. And I know that many of you have had to hear a parent, a sibling, or any of those things, and anyone that knows what that feels like can resonate with me that it is so incredibly painful to not be able to help someone you love and everything being out of your control. One of those things that no matter what you do, you can't change what happens. Remember the one goal he set for himself was that he really wanted to make it to Christmas. And that was our favorite holiday growing up, and that was the last time I ever spoke to him. On January 27th of 2023, I got a phone call, many phone calls from my parents that he had passed away. And I remember being in such denial of what had happened. It was very difficult for me to even be in a place where I could think that I could move forward with my life. I was very fortunate to have such a close relationship with my brother, and he was the most important person in the world to me. So all of this happening felt like my world had also come to an end. I know that grief is incredibly challenging and personal, but I really do want to share what has helped me find some sense of comfort during all of this. The first thing being to allow yourself to grieve. It's okay to feel sadness, anger, and confusion during this time. It's such a difficult thing to be experiencing. So allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself that time to process what has happened and to know that when people ask you if you're okay, it's okay to not be okay. We don't have to be okay. And that was something that was so difficult for me to come to terms with because I really wanted to prove to everyone that I was strong and I was okay. Quite honestly, that was killing me inside and I didn't even realize it at the time. My second piece of advice would be to seek help. And I think that can be through friends, through your family, or even getting professional help through therapy. I think therapy is something that has such a big stigma around it and people associate it with being bad. I think it's so beneficial and helpful to navigate your emotions and have someone guide you through the way you're feeling. And if those options that I listed aren't of interest to you, then my podcast is available to each and every one of you, and I want this to be a place where you feel that sense of support and you feel that you are getting help through what you're going through. Because I know for me, when I was going through it and didn't want to talk to anyone about it because I didn't want to accept that it was happening to me, I didn't talk or bring it up at all. I pretended like it wasn't happening, but that shouldn't be the case. My next piece of advice would be self-care. So whether that be putting a face mask on, putting on a diffuser, having some warm tea, or ensuring that you're taking care of your emotional and physical well-being. I've recently started doing hot yoga, which has been so amazing because it allows you to really reflect and express gratitude with everything that is happening in your life. Another form of self-care that I've started doing is journaling. And I cannot stress enough how much journaling has changed my life. Having prompts to express gratitude on what you're grateful for each day really allows you to center your thoughts in a positive way. Another thing that is very important is to ensure you're setting boundaries. You don't owe anyone your time, and you should be very mindful of how much energy certain situations or certain people take out of you. So eliminating people that don't uplift you and support you during your grieving process is 1000% valid and okay. You don't owe anyone any explanation or any time of that matter. I also think it's important to set boundaries with social media, because I know for me it was very difficult to constantly see things online, and the social comparison theory is so real and so true, and it can be so difficult to accept what has happened to you when you're constantly seeing this illusion that people are living such a happy life. It can be very difficult to accept what has happened to you when everything on social media seems like rainbows and butterflies. Another boundary is to avoid self-criticism and don't give yourself a timeline that you should get over something that has happened. So if you think that you should be getting over a breakup in 1 month, maybe that doesn't work for you. Or you think you should be over a loss of a loved one within a certain time frame. There is no time frame. So be kind to yourself and understand that things aren't going to be happening when you want them to be happening. My final boundary that I would recommend is tell people what questions are okay to ask. I know that a lot of time people do want to be supportive, but those questions may not be what you're comfortable with at that time, and that is completely okay. The last thing I'll mention that has really helped me is educating myself. So reading books about grief, asking other people who have experienced similar situations can be very helpful as well. There's support groups that you can join. I really hope my podcast can be a form of that for each of you, and I hope that we're able to build a community that supports one another in our healing journeys. Finally, I just want to say that grieving is never linear, and you're always going to have ups and downs, and things won't always get better, but you can learn how to live with what's happening and how to repurpose yourself. For those of you who've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, and I hope you stick around for more videos to come. If you have any suggestions about topics you'd like me to talk about or need any kind of advice, feel free to message me on my Instagram channel at @PamelaTreglov, and make sure to follow the Honey Podcast channel as well. Enjoy the rest of your beautiful day or night. Bye!